Summers. I'm the senator from the 18th District, and I'm joined by many of my colleagues here today, including Senator Paul Formica. To my left, we have Representative Mike France, Representative Holly Cheeseman, Representative Kevin Skolchek, Representative Ann Dauphiné, as well as First Selectmen, mayors, superintendents. We also have Board of Finance folks, town council members, and many community members here today. Today we are having this here. This is a school called Pleasant Valley School. It's one of the schools that the town of Groton had to close early this year because of the draconian cuts that were proposed by our governor. This school, just for a little historic background, used to start with about 400 students at the beginning of the year. And at the end of the year in June, there was still 400 students, but they had turned over twice because this is a military school, just to give you some perspective. We are here today to urge the legislature to override the governor's veto on a budget that passed the General Assembly this month. Earlier this week, we heard the descriptive adjectives that the governor used to describe this budget. And I noted that every single one of those started with the word anti. I can tell you one thing about this budget that passed. The only thing anti about it is it's anti-business as usual. This is a budget for all of the citizens of Connecticut, the working families, the elderly, the school children, those who are most vulnerable. This is not a budget for the politicians. It is a budget that's pro-education, increasing K through 12 education for the first time in many years. It is pro-labor, pro-teacher, and pro-economic development in the fact it increases municipal aid that is given to towns and cities, providing them with consistency for years to come so they can plan for the future and are not faced with massive layoffs. This budget provides stability so employers will have confidence to once again invest in Connecticut, increasing opportunity for all. This bipartisan solution avoids the governor's draconian and devastating cuts that would completely decimate towns and cities. It would destroy education as we know it here in Connecticut. This budget offers Connecticut residents concrete solutions to our current and seemingly never-ending financial crisis. This is a solution that should have been signed immediately.
Thank you, Heather. This is a budget that increases municipal aid and K through 12 education funding, and for the first time in years actually distributes education funding to districts most in need by following a real and new true education cost-sharing formula. It restores retroactively funding to that was cut to nonprofits in the governor's executive order, and it doesn't have the many harmful tax increases proposed in other budgets, such as the cell phone tax, sales tax on non-prescription drugs, real estate conveyance tax increase, and tax on secondary homes. As co-chair of the Appropriations Committee, we want to talk about the specific impact on the budget in some of our towns and cities here in southeastern Connecticut. In Groton, for example, this budget would have eliminated this closure by increasing overall municipal aid by $1 million in fiscal 2018 and $1 million in fiscal 2019. The Democrat proposed budget would cut municipal aid in Groton by $726,000 in 18 and another $1.6 million in 2019. In the great city of New London, this budget increases total municipal aid by $1.7 million in fiscal 2018 and by $3.4 million in fiscal 19. New London, under the proposed budget offered by the governor and Democrats, would see an overall loss in municipal aid. This bipartisan budget that passed both the House and the Senate makes the necessary decisions to reduce state expenses and cut administrative costs throughout state government, while simultaneously prioritizing the core functions that should be the part of state government.
This is a budget that actually provides a vision for the future of Connecticut. It restores funding for vital social services, particularly in low-income neighborhoods that were cut out of all of the other budgets. This budget protects things like Project Longevity, Care for Kids, Meals on Wheels, school-based health clinics, and the Connecticut Home Care Program, and most importantly for me, day and employment opportunities for those individuals with disabilities. In fact, this budget safeguards funding that the governor and other budgets proposed cut. Things like rape crisis centers, the community health centers, the family resource centers, and domestic violence shelters are all included in this budget. It does not shift any teacher retirement costs onto the towns and the cities. To be very clear, shifting even a portion of this responsibility opens the door to more burdens placed on the already overburdened municipality and taxpayer. This is the state's responsibility, and we stand firm on not allowing the state to push any of its obligation again down to the towns and municipalities. The topic of education is something that I want to be crystal clear on. We can absolutely agree that UConn is an enormous value to the state, and many students it serves every single day. I'm actually a UConn grad myself. The small reduction that we are asking UConn to make here, let's put it in perspective. It is less than a 6.4% reduction. It's $80 million out of a $1.23 billion budget funded by the taxpayers of Connecticut. In these challenging economic times, we have to recognize that money is not always being spent wisely, and we have to look where we can share services, cut expenses, and use the money more and allocate it more properly. Spread the savings throughout the government. For Governor Malloy and President Herbst to threaten to close campuses like Avery Point that are bursting at the seams, while not even taking a look at the administrative costs of UConn, which are ranked #1 in the nation, is shameful and morally negligent. We're standing here today to tell you that this bipartisan budget that has passed the legislature, this is all about this budget. It is a good budget for the citizens of Connecticut. We don't need party rhetoric before the needs of the hard-working people of Connecticut. We're not going to turn our backs on you, the taxpayers of Connecticut. Unfortunately, Governor Malloy has decided to launch a campaign against this budget for the simple reason that the ideas contained in it do not come from him. While he continues to play party politics and go on his exaggeration tour, our budget offers the people of Connecticut solutions, including dedicating $170 million more to education over the next 2 years. And once fully implemented over the next 10 years, we will be spending close to $700 million more on education funding for the citizens of Connecticut and our future generation. This is a governor, quite frankly, who's out of ideas. He's out of talent, he's out of resources, and he's quickly running out of allies. But unfortunately for us, we are out of time, and we must override this veto.
Thank you, Heather. Look, this is not a perfect budget. With a $5 billion deficit, that's probably not going to come from anybody. But to allow the governor's executive order to go into effect, while there is this balanced budget on the table, while it has been passed by both sides of the legislature with bipartisan support, would be irresponsible and fall short of what the executive branch was elected to do. To allow nonprofits to continue being cut when we have a budget that retroactively restores funding is kind of like what Einstein said, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. To allow schools to be annihilated by cuts where we have a solution is not moving Connecticut forward. The governor should not have vetoed this budget this morning. So now we call on all members of the Connecticut legislature to come together and do what the governor himself once said at the beginning of the session, that he wanted to restore predictability to our state. And so to do that, we ask our friends on both sides of the aisle to immediately override that veto. Our cities and towns, our nonprofits, our social services, those most vulnerable, and our children deserve that stability and predictability. This is what our budget does, and this is what this budget offers the people of Connecticut.
Hi everybody, Rob Simmons, First Selectman, Town of Stonington, and I'm wearing my UConn tie today, okay? Because I taught at UConn for 4 years as a teaching assistant and a pre-doctoral candidate. And I loved it, 1988 to 1992. That was UConn when the president had one mansion on campus and actually lived in it. That was when the South Campus looked like the South Bronx. That was before Governor Rowland did the UConn 2000 project, some called it UConn 2 billion, to build up the campus. That was before Senator Kathy Cook and Representative Lenny Winkler and I and members of the delegation secured $20 million to build the Marine Sciences Building. So we have been 100% for UConn for a long period of time, and by the way, bipartisan with Melody Peters and the rest of our Southeastern Connecticut delegation. But when the governor and the president of UConn come down here and make allegations about our representatives, that somehow they are responsible for the problems that we face in Hartford today, this is an outrageous statement to say. It's an outrageous statement to make. President Herbst says they might have to close Avery Point. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Let her try. My guess is the legislature will override it, and she'll be out of luck, out of town, out of a job. We built it. We're going to maintain it, and we're going to keep it. But the problem is not Avery Point. The problem is right here. This is a school that's closed. This is a school whose students have left, whose teachers are gone, whose administrators are gone. This is an empty school because of the policies coming out of Hartford today, specifically the policies from Governor Daniel Malloy, who is acting as a solo budget dictator, who has asked the legislature for how many months for a budget. And finally we get one that's bipartisan, voted for by Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate. And what does he do? He vetoes it. So towns like Groton and Stonington continue to suffer. Last year he cut $250,000 out of our existing budget, unprecedented. This year they zeroed out ECS for our schools and our children and our teachers and our administrators, gone. Then he zeroed out the TAR funds, Town Aid for Roads, gone. Then he zeroed out the LoCIP funds, local capital improvement projects, gone. And then the frosting on the cake was a approximate $2 million teachers' retirement bill, which we have never had to pay for before. We've never been responsible before. And by the way, it's a teacher's retirement plan that is not negotiated by the towns. It's negotiated by the state. So Governor Malloy has created a nightmare. The New London Day some months ago said his efforts are a strategy to get the legislature to act. It's just a strategy to get the legislature to act. Well, the legislature did act. And the veto is not a strategy. It's an act. If he didn't like the bill, he could have done what Jody Rell did a few years ago. Leave it alone and let it pass into effect. Wash your hands of it. Say it's lousy. It stinks. I don't like it. But you know what? I'll be Pontius Pilate. I'll wash my hands of it and let it go into effect. And then let the legislature work on the details. That's not what he did. He took a positive action against this bipartisan budget. And I would hope my friends in the legislature, House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, would take a positive action against him, which is to override the veto. One final thought. The Hartford Courant came out after the budget passed and referred to 3 Democrats in the Senate as defectors. It passed because of defectors. Well, I'm a veteran of the Cold War, and the term defector is not a positive term. It's a negative term. It was used by the communist Russians to defer to people who left the people's paradise. I consider Paul and Joan and Gail to be heroes. They had the guts to stand up against their governor and their delegation to do the right thing for their constituents and for the state. The time for name-calling has stopped. The time for action is here. And I encourage my friends in the legislature to continue to march and continue to do the right thing for our communities.